Great to have everyone here. I just want to say thank you. Over the course of Shabbat, we'll hear from Rabbi Cohen and Rabbi Reese. This evening, I just want to introduce Rabbi Michael Cohen, currently serves as the school rabbi at the Community Jewish Day School in New Orleans. And while we'll hear more about his personal story and Rabbi Reese's personal story tomorrow, both during services and after lunch, Rabbi Cohen's going to speak a little about both his time in New Orleans as well as Charlottesville, living in the South, and dealing with a legacy of hate in the South. So we'll turn it over to Rabbi Cohen.
All right. Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Anyone here, raise your hand, ever live in the South for an extended period of time? Okay, we got a couple of hands. Okay, very good. All right, so we'll compare notes afterwards. Indeed. Anyone here ever been to New Orleans before? Ah, good. So you'll know what I'm talking about. So tonight I'm primarily going to be speaking about New Orleans and some of the legacy, both Jewish and non-Jewish, that is happening in that city. New Orleans, as I'm sure those of you who have visited, know that it is like no place else on earth. It sits inside of a man-made bowl, whose bottom is an average of 5 feet below sea level, and its levees stretch up to about 30 feet around. So if you actually stand on top of the levee, you can really sort of see the fact that we're basically living in a bowl surrounded by water, Lake Pontchartrain on one side, the Mississippi River on the other side. We're about 50 miles upstream from where the Mississippi meets the Gulf of Mexico, and that is the reason for New Orleans' existence. That location and a bend in the river where the Mississippi once changed courses is where the French Quarter now sits. And it was that strategic location that gave New Orleans its existence. It's a strategic place for people to be able to trade goods coming up in from the Gulf and coming down the Mississippi from so much of America. While New Orleans ports are busy moving goods around the world, our city streets are welcoming millions of tourists a year, like so many people I've seen here. Bourbon Street is famous for its year-round debauchery, and we have world-class music and restaurants. New Orleans also has fabulous above-ground cemeteries and ghost tours that emphasize the legends of voodoo queens and romantics. There are other ghosts that haunt our city. Perhaps the biggest one is the one that people seldom talk about, that New Orleans was the American capital for trading human lives. New Orleans had the largest slave market in the United States. When more northern states needed fewer slaves because of economic and agricultural changes, those people were marched or boated down the river to New Orleans, where eager slave buyers bought well over 1 million people. Jews were in on the action as well. One prominent Jewish merchant even paid to have his name engraved above an arch on the slave auction block. There's one of the postcards that people sometimes buy to show that. You could see a Jewish name in the background. He's very proud of himself. The intellectual father of the Confederacy was Judah Benjamin, a secular Jew who served as Louisiana's senator before seceding from the Union. The lieutenant governor of Louisiana at the time of succession was an observant Jew named Henry Hymans. What does it mean to be a Jew living in New Orleans? With few exceptions, the earliest Jews of my city just wanted to fit in, to be accepted, and make a living. For many Jews, that meant buying and selling merchandise, including enslaved people. One rabbi was so committed to the Confederate cause that when the Union captured New Orleans, he fled to another southern state rather than swear an oath of allegiance to the Union. With the exception of some secret societies called crews, our Gentile neighbors welcomed Jews into society. For a people so used to rejection and persecution, the prize of acceptance was more than enough to justify participating in an evil institution. The legacy of the Confederacy lives on in my city today. The most obvious parts of that legacy are the street names. Until not too long ago, If I were to head from the French Quarter to pick up my kids at the JCC, the fastest way would be to go through Lee Circle and then to take a left on Jefferson Davis Parkway. These places used to have accompanying statues that were built during the Jim Crow era. After the Confederate-inspired church massacre in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015, New Orleans decided it was time to make a change. In the dead of night in 2017, construction crews removed the statues from their pedestals. After the murder of George Floyd, the city also started to change the street names. Jefferson Davis Parkway was named after Norman Francis, the longtime president of Xavier, which is a historically black university. Robert E. Lee Boulevard was renamed after the jazz great Allen Toussaint. Memorials are not just historical artifacts. They are statements about the values of a people. When you name a street after an African-American educator, instead of a man who forbade his slaves to learn how to read, you are making a value statement. When you replace a defeated slave-owning general with a beloved jazz musician, you are letting your people know that you value art and joy over misery and destruction. It is an embodiment of the Jewish idea of making a tikkun, of making the world a little bit closer to the moral universe we wish we lived in. Perhaps a Jew who deserves a pedestal in New Orleans is Judah Toro. The son of the Chazan of the Toro Synagogue in Rhode Island, Judah settled in New Orleans in the early 1800s. He fought bravely in the Battle of New Orleans, being gravely wounded in the fight. He went on to develop a fortune in trade and real estate, even avoiding trading in slaves while his contemporaries freely did so. What he is most remembered for is his generosity. He gave to Jews and non-Jews alike, helping to build churches and synagogues, endowing orphanages and hospitals. Much of his generosity will never be known because he preferred to give anonymously. Perhaps the kind of person you want to put on a pedestal is the kind who would hate to be there. We look to the past for role models. I applaud publicly celebrating the success stories, the people whose lives we can aspire to emulate. But we also have to remind ourselves of the moral failures, of the people who blithely committed unspeakable evil because it was socially acceptable. There is something to be learned from both. I like to think that our Jewish day school tries to make tikkunim in our own small way. Every year we march in the Martin Luther King Jr. Parade, and our proud participants in the ADL's No Place for Hate program. Every year, our sixth graders go to Memphis, to the National Civil Rights Museum, with Leona Tate, a pioneer in desegregating New Orleans schools. No one can fix the sins of the past overnight. The process can only begin by acknowledging that they happened in the first place. May we be blessed to live a life our descendants can be proud of, and may we have the moral courage to help repair that which is broken in this world. Shabbat Shalom. All right.
Everyone, turn if anyone has any questions or thoughts that you want to share. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, our grandson goes to Tulane University, and I follow it. And,
Sure.
I noticed that there was some.
I will repeat the question after it is finished delivering.
I noticed in the news there were some anti-Semitic or anti-Israel demonstrations on the campus at Tulane University, and I wonder if you can tell us about that.
Sure, so the question was hoping to get some more information about an anti-Semitic demonstration in the Tulane campus. So Tulane, like other universities around America, right now is sort of a hotbed of emotion between those supporting the Palestinian side and those defending Israel. Tulane is no exception. Yes, there was an incident outside of Tulane I'm trying to remember whether it turned violent or not. I don't think anyone was particularly hurt if it did. I can say that after that particular incident, there have since been other rallies for Israel since then, and the police have gotten a lot more strict about making sure to keep away any counter-protesters. And since that has happened, there hasn't been any incidents. But yeah, there was a confrontation that happened on Tulane. Yes?
What about the new Speaker of the House from Louisiana?
Oh, Mike Johnson?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Is he friendly to Jews, to Israel, think?
So,
I'm sorry.
yep,
Maybe I'm being prejudiced in my own way, but
yep.
from what I understand of his background, he's a very, very, very Christian-based fundamentalist.
Yes, so the question is a more of a political bent about, we have our new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who hails from the Shreveport area, northern Louisiana. My understanding of the man is that he is a deeply evangelical Christian, and the American evangelicalism has given Israel sort of a special pride of place for complicated theological reasons. And I have gotten no indication that he is anything but in accordance with that particular tradition. So I imagine that he is, as is the rest of the mainstream of his party, and the Democratic Party for that matter, very much in favor of supporting Israel. Yes, you, sir.
I'm wondering if you could talk about current relations between the Jewish community and other communities there, especially given the history that Jews shared with other residents there too that you started out talking about.
So the question is about current examples of relationships between Jews and non-Jews in New Orleans?
Yeah. Especially against the backdrop, knowing that the Jews contributed.
Right. So the truth is that New Orleans just doesn't talk about it. You can go downtown and we have signs and monuments and tours and all sorts of things all over the place. And in the entire city of New Orleans, there are exactly 2 signs that say that slaves were bought and sold here. Nobody talks about it. We're much happy to talk about jazz, to talk about voodoo queens, to talk about Mardi Gras and beads. People don't want to talk about the slaves, and it has a real impact. I mean, New Orleans is a majority black city, right? It's not like people went away, so people just don't talk about it. They don't want to, or at least some people don't want to. Yeah. Yeah, I saw your hand before.
The French cages
Yeah.
is going back. What was their relation for Jews, if you know, or today even, the people, how do they feel about Jews?
Sure. So the question was about the French Cajuns who, I think they originally came from Canada. Yeah, Acadian, yeah. And then they came down to New Orleans. Truth is that I can't say with any conviction about what they might have thought a couple hundred years ago. The Creole-speaking peoples of New Orleans don't really live in New Orleans. You won't really hear French spoken anywhere, except maybe in some phrases here and there, and the street names, which are also mispronounced, as is the tradition. Apparently, if you go south into sort of more of the people who live off of the water, live in the islands, you still have some of those dialects that are still sort of preserved there, and those peoples are still preserved there, but it's very marginal, at least from a New Orleanian perspective. You don't see much going back and forth. So I can't really talk too much about what they think of Jews, because as a Jew, I haven't had much to do with them myself. Yes?
Interestingly, we lived in New Orleans.
Ah.
And I'm a physician. I recall a child being diagnosed with Tay-Sachs, who was part of the Cajun community. And the geneticist, who was Jewish himself, concluded that this probably was someone that it was probably founder effect from some Jew who had absorbed themselves within the Cajun community.
Sure.
Perhaps a century or 2 ago.
So,
And I
yep.
think that the other thing that's interesting, so that it's with Sephardim, just like Judah Turo, that originated there. So people that I've worked with in the hospital had, some of them knew they had Sephardic names, but were in their branch of the family, Episcopalian or Catholic or whatever. However, they knew that they, as a family, for 3 to 5 generations, had maintained the knowledge that some branches remained Jewish and some didn't. And so they would go to each generation to the bar about mitzvahs and stuff like that.
That's beautiful. So that was a comment about how there's a legacy of Sephardic heritage that runs through generations in New Orleans. And yes, it was interesting. The earliest settlers were Sephardic Jews who were looking to make money. And one of the phrases that gets passed around a lot when you read the histories about the New Orleans Jewish community is that there were Jews in New Orleans long before there was Judaism. So a lot of these early Sephardim did not build synagogues. They did not build special cemeteries for Jews. Their kids all married Catholics or Protestants. It wasn't until later, Judah Turo being one of the exceptions, but even he gave as much money to churches as he did to synagogues. There was this sense of everyone being in it together. So yeah, there was definitely, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have some Jewish blood in them because they sort of dispersed into the general fabric of Louisiana.
Judah Toro is the one who actually started the whole idea of getting, when he opened up his infirmary there.
Yep.
The whole idea of donating for hospitals and having a name on the things. This was started with Turo, because in Europe they didn't do these things.
Yeah,
They named them after their saints, not people who gave money.
Yes. Actually, some people in New Orleans actually named things after Judah Toro preemptively to try and get him to give money. And it worked. That's where the name Turo Synagogue comes from. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, what is, I guess, the extent and nature of Jewish life in New Orleans, the number, where the schools are, where the shuls?
Sure. So New Orleans has, as far as I understand it, about a tenth of the Jewish population of Cleveland. We have about 8,000 Jews, give or take. It is a very close-knit community. You will find people who belong to multiple synagogues of multiple denominations. I would say there's sort of two clusters of Jewish life. There's one, which is where I live in Metairie. It's out in the suburbs. And there's sort of like about a mile where you find all the JCC, conservative, modern Orthodox, Reform, Chabad, are all within walking distance of each other. And then you have a few sort of more legacy campuses that were built around the turn of the 20th century, maybe a little bit earlier, which is Turo Synagogue and Sinai, Congregation Sinai. And also there's an Orthodox one, which is sort of held on by the skin of its teeth, called Anshe Sfard. We have, I think, 2 kosher restaurants. We have a kosher supermarket. We have just about 2, at least like almost 1 to 2 of everything. So there are 2 Jewish day schools. I'm at the community Jewish day school. And there's also one called Torah Academy, which is down the street, as is the tradition in Metairie. And that is run by the Chabad community and mostly for the Chabad community. And almost all of the Orthodox clergy in Chicago is actually, that's the other place I lived. In New Orleans is sort of descendants or related to this one Chabad family that came in the 70s or 80s. So that's sort of what it looks like there. But they're very involved in everything. They're really judges and, everything. The Jews are very involved. Yes, go ahead.
Please correct me if I'm incorrect.
Yep.
I remember years ago in Metairie, you mentioned Metairie.
Yes.
That was the home of David Duke.
David Duke.
And the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes. I have a great story for
I
that.
remember it was actually in the phone book there.
There's a what? A phone book?
It was actually in the phone book.
Yeah.
Listed in Metairie.
Yeah.
Was that a challenge?
Yes, it was a big challenge. So I was just talking to a friend of mine over Shabbat lunch because I was trying to find out more about the New Orleans Jewish community. Specifically, I wanted to find out more about what they did during the civil rights era, and nobody seemed to know. So I still need to do digging on that. What's that?
I could say things about that. The Temple Sinai, because in public things they did not allow integrated things that I think it was Ralph Bunch. There was someone in about 1961 who
Yeah.
was a black leader who came to New Orleans, and he spoke at Temple Sinai because they allowed the integrated.
Oh, well, good for Temple Sinai. So Temple Sinai clearly fell on the side of desegregation as early as 1961. So that's good to know. Yes, David Duke. So David Duke was running for governor back in the 90s. And, well, it was a strange situation because the guy running against him was a governor who was convicted of crimes while he was in office, went to prison, and was staging a political comeback, and he was running against David Duke. And the Jews really rallied. I mean, they went out there and they campaigned for this guy. It wasn't just the Jews, but everywhere you went, you could see a bumper sticker that says, "Vote for the crook. It's important." That was on people. That was what they came up with. But look, it's difficult. I mean, this is Louisiana. You know, you could have someone who was a grand wizard or whatever they call them, grand dragon, I don't know, of the Ku Klux Klan. And he was the Republican nominee for governor. You know, and people will go around and say, well, I voted for him, but it was really about the economics, you know, and it was, it's all about taxes. And I'm just like, really, man? But that's, you know, it won't be the first or the last time we see people make decisions like that. All right, yes.
Kind of coming off of that, does the Klan still have a major presence there? I mean, I lived in Maryland for a long time.
Yeah.
And we were back there a couple weeks ago for our mitzvah, and of all the places that I had to stop to change for Shabbat dinner was where I really did not want to be because I knew it was like right in the midst of Klan country.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, how did they even, with such a huge black population,
Yeah.
how did they even survive?
The Klan?
Yeah, I mean, I know this because
I can't really speak to that. Yeah, I don't know. I would say, well, I can theorize, but I can't speak to it. I would say that, as far as I know, the Ku Klux Klan has sort of just fallen out of favor and been replaced by other sort of like far right-wing racist groups, like neo-Nazis. I'll be talking about neo-Nazis tomorrow. Well, I don't even know if you want to call them neo-Nazis, just Nazis. Classic Nazis. Anyway, so I have lived places where there are neo-Nazis. Not just in Charlottesville. I lived in York, Pennsylvania. There was sort of like a known neo-Nazi house that was like a mile away from my dad's synagogue. They put a pig's head on the door at one point in time. I don't feel that in Metairie. I don't hear about that. I mean, to be honest, it's sort of like the thing that we have to deal with more, not just the Jews, it's just general sort of racism, you know, as a huge problem in terms of, you know, how black people are treated. And things like that. So that is sort of for whatever reason, as far as I can tell, Jews have sort of been accepted basically as white people in New Orleans, with the exception of some crews, right? Where you have to be of a certain religion in order to join a secret society. And that might explain some of the behavior that we've had, but that's sort of how it is. Yes. When were you in New Orleans, by the way? When were you in New Orleans?
1987 to 2000.
Okay, very good. So you're there for a good long time. Very nice.
I wonder if you know what the proportion of those who, like us, were not natives of New Orleans within the Jewish community, because my impression from the Shir Kodesh rabbi at that time was
Who was it? I guess it doesn't matter. Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah.
That he had, like, there was a significant outside Jewish community that was part of what bound us together. But I don't know if the conservative community is a little bit different than the Reform tend to be. But I don't know if you know the proportions these days.
I know that there are a lot of families, multi-generational families, people who sort of leave New Orleans and come back and bring back a spouse. There's a lot of people who sort of like leave town and come back, and New Orleans is really their home for them. Considering some of the challenges of living in New Orleans, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which are only getting worse in terms of hurricanes, in terms of all sorts of things, you have to really want to live there, or there has to be a really strong reason to stay. For some people, they really love the culture, because as I'm sure you remember, the culture is really unique. But I would say there still are people who come there for economic reasons. I mean, like myself, I came to New Orleans because my wife got a job at the medical center, formerly known as Charity. And so that's what brought me to New Orleans. And you've got plenty of other people who are there for work, for business, things like that. So I would probably still say, like, just looking around the room, it'd probably be like 70% people born in New Orleans, 30% people from outside, something like that. Yeah. Go ahead.
So my sister lives in North Carolina.
Okay.
I've asked her before what it's like, being Jewish in the South, and she's mentioned that a lot of businesses and restaurants and just places that you normally go day to day just have crosses up here and there, and it's just such a part of the culture in the South that is majority Christian. I mean, even though the rest of the world is too, but specifically the South.
Sure.
Right. And so I'm wondering if it's similar in New Orleans, and if you could speak to, and if the non-Jews of New Orleans know and interact and understand Jews, or is there sort of a divide?
Depends where you live. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you go to Newman, which was a school.
I'm in Newman.
What?
I have some former teachers.
Okay, cool. So this is again the legacy of Judah Turo. Judah Turo helped pay for an orphanage, which is where Jewish kids went for Jews, and then he helped create a school, which is now called Newman, to help train those orphans.
Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, and now it's probably the premier private school in New Orleans. It sort of abandoned its earlier mission earlier. Makes sense. Anyway, so New Orleans is a deeply Catholic city, very, very Catholic. Where I live in Metairie, super Catholic. If you're not walking down the Jewish part, and even in the Jewish part, I mean, it's just like fish fries during Lent. Everywhere you go, people mostly send their kids to Catholic schools because most people don't, if they can afford it, don't send their kids to the public schools. I would say, I don't know. I mean, I think if you're running around, going to Newman, going to Country Day, these big private schools, Jews, you go to bar mitzvahs. Other than that, I don't think so. I mean, I gave a talk to people. Every year I give a talk to a group of high school students, high school girls who go to Holy Cross. It's like a Catholic high school, and I'm their representative of Judaism. They take a world religions class. And usually I'm the first Jewish person they've seen before. So I think Jews aren't that well known unless you sort of really run in the social circles where Jews are. Yeah. Yeah.
Do the majority of the Jewish children go to Jewish day schools or public?
It's so hard to know. Here, I'll tell you. So I would say the majority of Jewish kids, as far as I know, probably go to private school, but not Jewish day school. Or they go to one of 3 magnet schools in New Orleans that is considered to be like socially acceptable, like a good enough school to send your kids. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
And the public schools are mainly black, but you've got a huge black community.
Yeah, it's all part of this is all legacy of segregation. So what happened was there was a huge white flight which led to Metairie, which is why Metairie became the new place for everyone to move to, including all the Jews. And then, especially after Katrina, the New Orleans was taken as sort of like, oh, we can do whatever we want. and Republicans were in charge, and they were like, let's try and run a model society based off of what we believe in, which is school choice. So what they did was they basically turned New Orleans into just a series of charter schools. Every school was a charter school, and it was sort of capitalism, you know, like whatever, may the best school win. And there were a few schools that won, and there were a lot of schools that did not do well. And so either you get into the good schools, or you just go to whatever private school you can afford to if you can afford it.
But we should say that before that, so the public schools would spend about $3,000 per student. The teachers had to buy a lot of the stuff that the kids use, the paper and all that kind of stuff. So that's part of it. There was choices in the way the city paid the taxes towards the schools and
Right.
the legacy from civil war. It was Catholic even in the 19th century, so that became some of the excuses for fighting.
Right, but they really, I mean, the schools really ballooned. And so, I mean, a whole bunch of people withdrew their kids from public school rather than go to a desegregated school. So there are huge numbers of kids in the 60s who just said, nope. And the whole school, you know, you put in a black kid, I'm going to take out, the whole school basically disappeared. They all went to private school. Yes?
Can you talk about any anti-Semitism since there or in recent history, and especially since October 7th?
In New Orleans?
New Orleans, yeah.
No. Not in New Orleans. I mean, I guess the thing, what? The Tulane incident, yes. Yes, I guess. I can say that by and large, I have felt very supported. There's the Jefferson Parish, which is, we have parishes, not counties. The Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Department immediately started posting people outside of Jewish institution without even being asked. They made, you know, I would say that by and large, people have been super, super supportive of protecting the Jewish community in New Orleans. That being said, I live in Metairie, you know, and there are other areas of New Orleans which I'm sure might be less sympathetic. But I have not personally experienced anything, nor have I heard of anything aside from college demonstrations and kids fighting with each other that would point to that. So it's been fine. I mean, it's been scary. It's been scary everywhere. But nothing that's actually happened aside from that incident that I know of. Yes?
Have there been any public statements by politicians in support of Israel?
Sure. I mean, we had a huge rally. I didn't even know there were so many Jews in New Orleans. We pretty much a couple of days after it happened, we had a big rally at one of the local Reform synagogues. And like I said, we have maybe 8,000 Jews in New Orleans, and there was over 1,000 people there. People I'd never seen before. Almost everyone knows everybody, or I thought I did. I mean, like, people from Tulane, you know, students from out, you know, people, Israelis who just happened to be in the city of New Orleans, you know, people who otherwise didn't have a connection necessarily to organized Jewish life. They're all there. And politicians sent in statements. Steve Scalise, who's my congressman, he sent in a statement, you know, reaffirming his support of Israel's right to defend itself and to defeat the terrorists that attacked her. The local congressman of New Orleans, Troy Carter, he had similar things that he said as well. I think supporting Israel doesn't seem to be a very controversial position to take in Louisiana. Has been my experience. Yep. Well, yeah, if you have any other questions that you think of later, I'm going to be here for tomorrow as well. Going to be talking about other things. Charlottesville's going to be after lunch. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Specifically, we lived in Charlotte, North Carolina for 8 years, 62 to 70 before we moved here.
Hmm?
And what we found was that the Northerners, the people who came from the North, who came to Charlotte, and there were a lot of them, there were a lot of salesmen, were like Northerners. The Southern Jews were like Southern Christians.
Hmm.
In other words, they had the same attitudes when it came to tzedakah and everything else. Absolutely. And I'm just wondering, what's it like in New Orleans? Can you distinguish who's who? Those who, you know, where they come from.
That's a good question. There is a bit of a New Orleanian accent, but I know in terms of the mannerisms, it's really what you're talking about, their attitudes.
And the accent, don't forget the accent too.
Yeah, sure, the accent. Not that I have noticed. I don't think there hasn't been a huge, like when I think about my attitude, I'm a Northerner, living in the South, and when I think about my attitudes towards the world, towards Judaism, if anything, the only thing that I've noticed is there's kind of an easygoing quality that is sort of pervasive around New Orleans. It's called the Big Easy. And people do tend to be sort of more laid back about things, take their time more. And there is very, very strong communal support. There's really institutions support each other regardless of denominations. You have a room with Chabad all the way to Reform all in one room, all working together, which is not something that, yeah.
Your example, one of the favorite lines was you all come back, whatever.
Yeah.
In other words, they wanted you to visit them, but they didn't mean it.
Oh. I don't know. Maybe I didn't pick up on it. Maybe they didn't want me to come back and I stuck around. I don't know. Yeah. Interesting. Oh, like y'all come back? Yeah, they have some things. I mean, there's definitely some linguistic stuff, but I don't know. It's not worth talking about all the little peculiarities. But yeah, I don't notice anything big. All right, well, thank y'all so much.
Good. Thank you, Rabbi Cohen. I just want to remind everyone to hopefully you're able to join us tomorrow, Shabbat morning. Rabbi Reese is leading our Torah Cafe at 9 a.m. Rabbi Reese and Rabbi Cohen will both be speaking during services, during the normal time for a sermon, about Kristallnacht and the importance of standing up and what it means to stand up to hate. And please join us for a congregational lunch open to everyone, followed by a panel where both Rabbi Cohen, who will speak primarily about his time before New Orleans, living in Charlottesville, during the Unite the Right rally, and Rabbi Reese will share his personal story and experience in Pittsburgh following the Tree of Life shooting, together with AJC Regional Director Lisi Shapiro and ADL Regional Director Kelly Fishman. We also, if you did not see Magen David Adom, just let us know a couple days ago that one of the medics who was in Sderot right at the border with Gaza is in town and will also be sharing words and her experience responding in the aftermath of what happened just a few weeks ago on October 7th at the end of services tomorrow. So please, if you're able, join us for what should be a very powerful and important Shabbat. Thank you. Good evening. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.